Beneath the ashes of victory lies a darker war, one fought in sealed vaults, erased files, and whispers no soldier dared record. Shadows of vanished convoys, silent airstrips, and buried experiments linger like ghosts behind the triumph. What if the real secrets of the Second World War were not won, but hidden, buried so deep that even history itself was ordered to forget? On April 20th, 1945, as the Red Army breached the Oder front and pushed toward the outskirts of Berlin, a small column of covered trucks left Nordhausen under heavy Waffen-SS escort. According to fragmentary Wehrmacht logistics records uncovered, decades later, the convoy bore the designation Morgenstern 12 Weiss. Its route was logged in Reich transport ledgers as priority transfer restricted. The cargo, described only as mechanische Vorrichtungen, Sondertyp, was ordered to be delivered to the Bavarian Alps. None of the trucks ever arrived. Allied documents compiled after the war show that US Army intelligence had tracked the movement of several SS convoys from the Harz Mountains between April 16th and April 23rd. Units from the 104th Infantry Division intercepted one such convoy near Kassel, where they discovered precision instruments and disassembled V2 guidance components hidden beneath crates of canned rations. Yet the column designated Morgenstern 12 vanished without engagement, despite operating in an area heavily patrolled by both American and Soviet forces. What makes the disappearance extraordinary is that decrypted Enigma traffic, intercepted by Bletchley Park and preserved in the British National Archives under HW 19224, describes Morgenstern as strategisch überragend, Feind darf nicht besitzen, strategically paramount, the enemy must not possess. After the war, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, compiled a classified memorandum. Subject: Missing Convoy, Harz Region, IGCHI dated September 1945. The report details that 4 of the crates were briefly sighted at an Allied collection depot near Hanover before being transferred under armed guard to an airfield at Celle. From there, they were loaded onto a C-54 transport plane destined for Cherbourg. Yet the airframe, tail number 42, 72321, does not appear on US Army Air Force's flight logs. Inquiries filed by the War Department in 1946 note that the aircraft was never assigned to the European theater. Further fragments of testimony emerged decades later. In 1963, a former logistics officer from the US 9th Army, Lieutenant Harold V. Dawson, gave a private deposition, later declassified in 2004, stating that he witnessed wooden crates branded with the insignia of SS WWII, the SS Main Economic and Administrative Office, being offloaded at Celle under unusually strict security. Dawson claimed the crates were not placed with standard confiscated materiel, but instead driven to a separate hangar marked with US military police cordon tape. Within hours, the airfield was cleared of all non-essential personnel. Speculation over the contents of Morgenstern intensified after Soviet archives released partial records from the NKVD's Department of Special Operations. A file dated June 2, 1945, references a German system of flight correction beyond current enemy rockets. Another, from July of that year, cites prisoner interrogations claiming the Reich had experimented with gyroscopic stabilizers, not for rockets, but for vehicles yet unbuilt. Though these accounts remain vague, they correspond to research carried out by Dr. Siegfried Knemeyer, head of the Luftwaffe's Technical Development Office, who had explored advanced inertial guidance systems late in the war. Knemeyer himself was captured by the Americans and absorbed into Operation Paperclip in 1947, but never mentioned Morgenstern in his post-war interviews. The British Foreign Office raised its own suspicions. An internal 1948 memo from the Joint Intelligence Committee notes, Convoy Morgenstern, no trace. Multiple false leads in US records. Recommendation, refrain from inquiry. Subject considered classified beyond liaison. The phrasing suggests the British were deliberately shut out from whatever material the Americans had acquired. Historian Anna Rademacher, who analyzed the file in 1998, argued that Morgenstern likely represented a technological prototype deemed too sensitive to share, even with close allies. By the early 1950s, sightings of documents related to Morgenstern nearly vanish. Only two surface again. One in a CIA research index from 1957 referencing Morgenstern crates, contents unknown, and another in a US Air Force Air Materiel Command log mentioning Category A equipment, gyrostabilization assemblies. These fleeting references vanish after 1960, coinciding with the period when the Air Force was accelerating development of inertial navigation systems for the SM-65 Atlas and Titan ICBMs. Eyewitness testimony adds another layer of unease. In 1972, during an oral history project at Columbia University, a retired German railway worker named Erich Müller described seeing a small convoy of trucks near Göttingen in April 1945. Müller recalled overhearing SS officers arguing in hushed tones, one mentioning Sternkisten, star crates. The convoy, he claimed, diverted off the main road onto a wooded path, escorted by motorcycles. He never saw them return. For decades, Morgenstern lingered only as a shadow in declassified footnotes. But in 1994, researchers combing through US Army Signal Corps film archives discovered several reels labeled Hards Recovery 45. The reels, heavily deteriorated, contained footage of soldiers inspecting wooden crates with stenciled markings. Morgenstern 7, Morgenstern 11. The film cuts abruptly as one soldier lifts the lid of a crate, revealing what appears to be a complex assembly of metallic spheres and wires. The remainder of the reel is blank. When the footage was catalogued, archivists noted that reels 3 through 6 of the sequence were missing from the collection, with no explanation in Army records. What has emerged in the decades since is less a complete picture than a set of contradictions. Some suggest Morgenstern was a prototype gyroscopic device intended for advanced missile guidance, suppressed because of its relevance to Cold War strategic weapons. Others believe it represented a broader research program, an attempt by the collapsing Reich to trade technology for survival. More conspiratorial claims hold that the crates contained devices wholly unrelated to conventional warfare, citing the peculiar secrecy surrounding their disappearance. Whatever the truth, the paper trail ends abruptly. The last known reference to Morgenstern appears in a 1968 Department of Defense archival index, marked only Morgenstern, records destroyed by authority, 1959. No reason was given, and no surviving copy has surfaced. Lieutenant Dawson, the logistics officer who first raised questions, died in 1977. His family maintains that after his deposition, he was repeatedly visited by men from Washington, warning him never to speak publicly. He never did. Nearly 80 years later, the fate of Morgenstern 12 remains unsolved. Was it simply lost cargo amidst the chaos of a collapsing regime, its importance exaggerated by rumor and hearsay? Or was it a weapon, a device, or a system so disruptive that it demanded silence from both victors and vanquished? For now, only fragments of records, redacted memoranda, and half-burned reels of film testify that something left Nordhausen in April 1945, something the world was never meant to see again. In the frozen expanse of Karelia, where the forests stretch for hundreds of miles and the lakes lie buried under winter ice, there stands the skeletal outline of an airstrip long erased from official maps. Soviet documents once referred to it only as Objekt Sever 9s. Its existence remained a rumor until the mid-1990s, when declassified CIA intercepts revealed the site as one of the most heavily guarded installations of the late Cold War, a place so sensitive that even Soviet cartographers left the region blank. The origins of Sever 9 reach back to March 1945, when NKVD units seized a convoy of German scientists fleeing Königsberg. Among the captured was Dr. Otto Fleischer, a mid-level physicist who had worked under the Reich Research Council on electromagnetic propulsion studies. Soviet records specifically a file in the GRU archive labeled Fleischer 12. Note that his expertise was diverted to a special division in Karelia, purpose undisclosed. The Soviets had relocated entire laboratories before, but Seizure 9 was unusual. It was not constructed near Moscow, Leningrad, or within the Ural complexes, but deep in the forests near the Finnish border, where access was all but impossible without military clearance. By 1952, US aerial reconnaissance flights over the Karelian Isthmus began reporting a cleared strip of land measuring nearly 2,000 meters, serviced by temporary barracks and reinforced bunkers. The photographs, filed under Operation Whitebird, were analyzed by the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC. One report from August 1953 concluded, "Facility inconsistent with standard Soviet military infrastructure, possible test field for unconventional aviation." The report never left internal circulation. Local villagers recalled stranger details. A Karelian fisherman named Pyotr Ilyin, interviewed by Finnish border guards in 1956, claimed he saw convoys of covered trucks moving through the forest at night. The soldiers, he said, wore not standard Red Army uniforms, but long black coats and respirator masks. Ilyin swore that the engines of the trucks emitted a high-pitched hum unlike ordinary vehicles. Weeks after his statement, Ilyin was detained by Soviet authorities. He never returned. Finnish intelligence reports mark him simply as disappeared, presumed detained. The CIA first learned the term Seizure 9 in a decrypted KGB transmission intercepted in 1961. The message referenced a containment perimeter and warned of civilian intrusion beyond safe threshold. This curious phrasing led analysts to believe the site was not a weapons depot or aircraft test field, but rather a facility housing dangerous material, chemical, biological, or radiological. Yet no fallout patterns or contamination spikes were detected in the surrounding region. The anomaly deepened when satellite imagery from 1967 revealed the expansion of a vast subterranean structure adjacent to the runway, complete with reinforced blast doors large enough to admit entire vehicles. The Soviets had poured enormous resources into a site the outside world could not acknowledge existed. Then, in late 1978, Seizure 9 was abandoned overnight. CIA satellite passes between October and December show the site fully staffed, with convoys moving daily. By January 1979, no vehicles remained. The runway was scarred with demolition charges, and the subterranean entrances had been sealed with poured concrete. US analysts were stunned. Nothing of such scale had ever been simply erased. The Soviets dismantled entire installations, but they did not entomb them. An internal CIA cable from March 1979 concluded, "Activity ceased abruptly, cause unknown. Recommend termination of surveillance until further human intelligence can be sourced." Hints of what happened surfaced years later in the memoirs of Colonel Alexei Voronin, published clandestinely in 1992. Voronin had served in the 6th Independent Red Banner Army, which provided external security for the complex. He recalled a catastrophe in late autumn of 1978. "One morning," he wrote, "we were told to form a perimeter and allow no one inside. Even generals were denied entry. Convoys of men in sealed suits entered the hangars. For 3 days, we heard nothing but the sound of machinery, like a constant grinding beneath the ground. On the 4th day, the order came to withdraw. We were told never to speak of it again." Voronin died in 1993 under disputed circumstances. His memoirs were smuggled out of Russia by his nephew. When the Soviet Union collapsed, fragments of Seizure 9's file were opened in the chaos of archival transfers. A single entry in the Ministry of Defense Index described it as a protective containment site, material origin foreign. Another, marked Seizure 9 Directive 442, stated bluntly, "Mission concluded, loss acceptable, perimeter sealed by order of Central Committee." Scholars who reviewed the fragment argued that foreign may have referred not to Western equipment, but to captured German technology, consistent with the presence of Dr. Fleischer. Yet all records relating to Fleischer end in 1954, his ultimate fate unknown. American intelligence officers who re-examined Sever-9 in the 1990s encountered their own wall of silence. The National Reconnaissance Office declassified several satellite images, but redacted any analytical commentary. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2002 yielded a heavily censored CIA dossier in which every reference to the site's function was blacked out. The only line left intact read, "Sever-9 presented a hazard that required mutual non-disclosure." The phrase implied that both Washington and Moscow had agreed to suppress the subject, a rare instance of Cold War cooperation. To this day, the site remains sealed. Russian authorities list the coordinates as restricted federal property, patrolled by border troops. No civilian expeditions are permitted. In 2008, a Finnish environmental NGO attempted to conduct aerial photography of the area, but their aircraft was forced to divert by Russian fighters. The resulting image, though blurred, revealed the cracked outline of the old runway, now half swallowed by forest. The blast doors remain visible, buried beneath decades of moss and snow. What Sever-9 contained has never been revealed. Some suggest it was a biological weapons project that suffered a catastrophic leak. Others argue it housed experimental energy research derived from German wartime files, an effort too unstable to continue. A darker interpretation claims the Soviets found something they could not control, an artifact, a material, or a device seized in 1945, and chose to bury it rather than risk further catastrophe. The fact that both superpowers agreed to silence strengthens this possibility. The official story is absence. No maps, no records, no survivors willing to speak. Only scattered testimony, fragments of directives, and a sealed scar in the forest bear witness to the complex once called Sever-9. For those who believe in buried truths, it stands as one of the most enigmatic reminders of how much of the 20th century remains hidden in classified vaults. In June 1944, less than 2 weeks after the Normandy landings, a 3-man Special Operations Executive (SOE) team was dispatched into occupied France under the codename Phantom Group. Their orders, preserved in fragmentary form in the British National Archives file HS 6428, tasked them with infiltrating a Wehrmacht signals hub near Rouen. The mission objective was simple on paper: disrupt German field communications ahead of the Allied push toward Paris. Yet Phantom Group never returned. What survives are fragments of intercepts, redacted memoranda, and a trail of deliberate erasure that points to one of the most disturbing episodes of the war. The men, Captain William H. Carver, Sergeant Jacques Delorme, and radio operator Peter Nash, were dropped by a Halifax bomber on the night of June 18th. Their landing zone, a farm near Mont-Saint-Aignan, was secure. Resistance contacts later confirmed they made their rendezvous and began operations within 48 hours. But within days, Allied radio traffic in the sector began to display anomalies. Decrypted German communications from Bletchley Park, catalogued under file HW 19302, refer to an Orchestra Schwarz unit operating in Normandy, described as tasked with Einspielung falscher Befehle, the insertion of false orders. Phantom Group's last confirmed transmission, sent on June 23rd, included a cryptic phrase not part of their codebook: shadow music, playing loudly. After that, silence. 5 days later, an entire battalion of the US 79th Infantry Division advanced toward Pont de l'Arche under orders that no Allied staff officer later admitted to issuing. They were ambushed by entrenched Panzer Grenadiers and suffered nearly 600 casualties. The official US Army After Action report attributes the blunder to misinterpreted field signals. But British intelligence officers noted the incident corresponded precisely with German references to Black Orchestra operations. The term Black Orchestra was itself a linguistic trap. To Allied ears, it resembled the name of the anti-Hitler resistance network, Die Schwarze Kapelle, but German documents suggest the name was a deliberate deception, intended to confuse Allied analysts if traffic was intercepted. The unit appears only in scattered Wehrmacht and SS records, none of which survived intact. One fragment, found in a burned file recovered from an SS signals officer in Chartres, described the unit's task as Stimmen der Feinde fälschen, forging the voices of the enemy. Whether this referred to radio transmissions, impersonation, or both remains unclear. After the war, SOE archives underwent a massive purge. In 1946, an internal memorandum from Brigadier Charles Hambro ordered the destruction of files relating to compromised communications in France. June-July 1944. Phantom Group's personnel records were quietly transferred to restricted status, and in 1951, they were officially listed as killed in action, circumstances unknown. Yet, a handwritten annotation in the margin of Nash's personnel file, discovered by historian David Layton in 1987, reads simply, "Captured, used, silenced." No signature accompanied the note. Testimonies from French villagers add further layers to the mystery. In 1962, the French journal Revue d'Histoire Militaire published an interview with a former resistance courier named Henri Vasseur, who claimed he saw 3 captured agents brought to the Gestapo headquarters in Rouen in late June 1944. The men, he insisted, spoke English. Vasseur remembered one repeating the words, "They made us send it." When pressed on who they were, Vasseur could not say. He died in 1965. No corroboration of his account has surfaced. Bletchley Park files, declassified in 1991, revived interest in the case. Analysts at Station X had indeed flagged unusual German traffic in June 1944, noting that several intercepted orders to Allied divisions did not correspond with known Allied ciphers. One decrypted message, sent from a German station in Rouen, contained orders for a feint advance toward Vernon, orders that Allied commanders inexplicably followed. The margin notes by British codebreakers reveal their frustration. Source: cannot be ours, yet field confirms execution. The implication was chilling. German units had not only intercepted Allied communications, but somehow introduced false signals, convincing enough to redirect entire battalions. Some historians suggest Phantom Group was coerced into transmitting, under duress, their captured radios repurposed by the Germans to seed disinformation. Others argue the men were executed immediately, their identities stolen by Black Orchestra operators, who then impersonated Allied teams. A more troubling theory posits that Phantom Group was deliberately sacrificed. An OSS memorandum from August 1944, marked Eyes Only, mentions cross-channel interference with SOE circuits, acceptable risk in current operations. Scholars who reviewed the memo interpret this as tacit acknowledgement that certain teams were deployed with the expectation of failure, as part of wider deception gambits. In the Cold War years, the story resurfaced in unexpected places. A 1957 CIA training manual on counter-communications warfare included a case study, without naming specifics, of an Allied sabotage team in Normandy neutralized by enemy false orders. The manual stressed the importance of verifying transmission origin even under combat conditions. Though anonymized, the account bears unmistakable resemblance to Phantom Group. The final haunting clue came in 1991 with the decryption of a long-overlooked fragment of German traffic, originally intercepted but never fully processed during the war. It reads, "Orchestra concludes, enemy shadows no longer needed, 3 voices silenced." The transmission was logged from Rouen at 03:14 on June 28, 1944, the same night Phantom Group disappeared from all records. Today, no memorial exists for Carver, Delorme, or Nash. Their names are absent from the SOE Roll of Honor in Westminster Abbey. Their mission logs remain sealed, their files redacted beyond recognition. What remains is a puzzle pieced together from vanished battalions, ambiguous intercepts, and the faint echoes of transmissions that led men to their deaths. Whether Phantom Group were victims of betrayal, pawns in a larger deception, or the unwilling instruments of the Black Orchestra, their story endures only in shadows, an erased chapter of a war already defined by secrets. On January 19, 1945, units of the US 95th Infantry Division advanced into Lower Silesia, seizing control of a vast salt mine near Wieliczka. Expecting to find looted art or munitions, soldiers instead uncovered a cavernous chamber filled with abandoned research equipment. Crates were stacked 3 meters high, stenciled with both SS runes and Luftwaffe insignia. Scattered among them were documents labeled Projekt Nebelsturm. The soldiers filed standard seizure reports, but when those papers resurfaced in 1946, nearly every line of detail was redacted. The official army inventory lists miscellaneous scientific apparatus with no further elaboration, yet fragments of reports survive in personal diaries. Lieutenant Robert G. Mills, an ordnance officer with the 379th Infantry Regiment, wrote that the equipment resembled rows of glass cylinders filled with metallic filaments, arranged as if for electrical discharge. Mills noted several crates marked with both German and Cyrillic script, as though Soviet scientists had collaborated before the war's end. His journal was confiscated by counterintelligence officers in March 1945. Only carbon copies, preserved by his family, remain. By April 1945, US technical teams from the Alsos mission were dispatched to the site. A classified Alsos memorandum, later discovered in the National Archives under RG-77, describes Nebelsturm not as a weather project, as earlier rumors suggested, but as a cognitive interference system intended to degrade command integrity. The memo, heavily censored, includes a passage noting that subjects exposed to test chambers reported auditory phenomena, disorientation, and involuntary compliance. In plainer terms, the equipment was not designed to cloud skies, but to cloud minds. Captured German scientists added weight to this interpretation. In May 1945, interrogators at Fort Hunt, Virginia, questioned SS engineer Karl-Heinz Trommler. Under file P.O. Box 1142, he claimed Nebelsturm attempted to use high-frequency electromagnetic oscillation to induce confusion in enemy pilots. When pressed, he added cryptically, "It was not the pilots we tested, it was our own men." Trommler died in 1947 before further questioning. No technical drawings of the devices have ever been found. Equally troubling are the testimonies of soldiers who guarded the mine. In 1962, a group of veterans from the 95th Division gathered in Pittsburgh for a reunion. Oral histories recorded. They revealed disturbing recollections. Several men recalled phantom music within the mine, low humming tones, like distant engines. Others claimed they suffered sudden memory lapses, unable to recall hours of routine guard duty. One sergeant described vivid hallucinations of marching figures moving through the walls of the mine. None of these symptoms appear in the regiment's medical records. The men agreed never to speak publicly, fearing ridicule, but privately insisted. The experiences were real. The transfer of Nebelsturm materials to US custody is equally murky. Alsos shipping manifests from June 1945 show 42 crates transported to Frankfurt. From there, 29 were forwarded to Antwerp and loaded onto US Navy cargo vessel SS Carroll Victory. But final delivery records to New Jersey list only 25 crates. 14 crates vanished en route. The War Department blamed clerical errors. Yet an internal memo from the Office of Naval Intelligence in 1946 remarks on classified shipments offloaded at Norfolk under restricted authority. The reference number corresponds to the missing crates. By 1947, rumors linked Nebelsturm to research conducted at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Declassified Air Materiel Command files mention foreign apparatus, psychological effects, unrepeatable. A physician attached to the base hospital later told his son, in a recorded 1981 interview, that several Air Force volunteers experienced seizures and permanent hearing loss after participating in trials with captured German wave devices. None of this appears in published medical literature. The physician requested anonymity until his death. The tape was released posthumously in 1994. Soviet interest in Nebelsturm was equally intense. A 1951 GRU directive, unearthed after the Cold War, refers to Western possession of interference generators of the Nebelsturm type. The directive orders immediate duplication efforts, though no evidence suggests the Soviets ever succeeded. Soviet defectors in the 1970s spoke of entire laboratories dedicated to psychotechnologies, but none admitted knowledge of the salt. mine seizure. The strangest evidence of all lies in the personal accounts of those who revisited the site after the war. In 1959, a Polish journalist named Andrzej Czarnecki entered the Wieliczka mine with official permission to document its wartime history. His notes, published privately, describe finding sealed-off chambers that emitted an inexplicable metallic odor. Czarnecki reported a sensation of time slipping, claiming his watch ran nearly 20 minutes fast after leaving the mine. Days later, he suffered a nervous breakdown. He spent the rest of his life institutionalized. His surviving papers, kept by relatives, contain repeated references to the storm in the fog. US government references to Nebelsturm vanish almost entirely after 1960. In 1965, the Department of Defense issued an internal directive stating all research related to electromagnetic cognition interference to be subsumed under Projekt Sundial. Whether Sundial was a continuation or a cover name is unknown. Veterans who attempted to access their medical files from the Wieliczka operation reported that entire sections were missing. One, Private First Class Raymond Kelly, wrote to his congressman in 1972, "They took our memories, and now they've taken the records of our memories." To this day, no museum or archive acknowledges Nebelsturm. The salt mine is marketed as a tourist site, its wartime chapters reduced to a footnote, yet buried in a restricted section of the US Army Corps of Engineers archive remains a single photograph labeled Nebelsturm apparatus. It shows a long corridor lined with cylindrical tubes, each capped with wires leading to a central console. The negative is deteriorated and no context is attached. The photograph is stamped, access by order only, destroy by 1970. Somehow, it survived. If Nebelsturm was merely failed German science, why were 14 crates erased from the record? Why were veterans' symptoms never acknowledged? And why did both superpowers expend so much effort to suppress its traces? The answers remain locked away, sealed in concrete chambers and redacted files. What is certain is that in the dying months of the Third Reich, something was built deep underground, not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of perception, a storm, not in the skies, but in the human mind. In May 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed and Allied forces swept into Austria, a Ranger detachment of the US 10th Infantry Regiment was ordered to secure a Benedictine monastery perched in the Tyrolean Alps. According to operational logs later, filed under US Army Group G, the site was believed to be sheltering retreating SS officers. Instead, the Rangers discovered thousands of reels of film stored in steel containers, each stamped with the Reichsadler insignia and the classification, Code Geheime Reichssache. Within days, the entire cache had vanished into the custody of American intelligence. The monastery seizure remained an obscure anecdote until 1979, when a retired ranger named Corporal Thomas Avery spoke privately to a journalist. Avery recalled that the film reels were labeled with alphanumeric codes, Versuch A12AU, Versuch B7POW, and were packed alongside Luftwaffe research notes. He claimed one reel was briefly projected inside the monastery's refectory. It showed what appeared to be a disc-shaped aircraft tethered on a test rig, rotating as technicians in SS uniforms took measurements. Avery insisted the footage was genuine. Weeks later, he retracted the story, claiming confused memory. He died in 1980. No official correction was ever published. US Army shipping manifests from June 1945 confirm the monastery contents were loaded onto transport trucks under escort of the 3rd Military Police Battalion. The destination is listed as Depot R84, Salzburg, a code name with no matching records. By July, no trace of the films remained in Army archives. A War Department memo, classified top secret and dated August 2, 1945, states bluntly, visual documentation secured from Tyrolean site, custody transferred to OSS, European Theatre Section. All subsequent correspondence is redacted. Eyewitnesses add unsettling detail. In 1946, a local priest, Father Joseph Stein, told parishioners that the monastery's basement had been commandeered by the SS in 1943. He claimed the monks were forbidden to enter and that convoys of trucks arrived at night carrying sealed canisters. In May 1945, after the Rangers departed, Stein attempted to re-enter the sealed rooms, but found them gutted. He described scorched floors and a pervasive chemical odor. Stein himself died in 1947 in what Austrian police described as an accidental fire. Curiously, the official parish records of his testimony disappeared in the 1950s, leaving only notes from villagers who recalled his warnings. Soviet intelligence also took notice. A GRU dispatch dated October 1945, now declassified, references American seizure of visual records, Flugkörper neuartig, unconfirmed. The report accuses the US of concealing German prototypes from Allied inspection, citing an unspecified monastery near Innsbruck. Moscow's interest appears to have been frustrated. No Soviet records suggest they ever recovered duplicate reels. This absence itself is striking, as the Soviets were otherwise meticulous in appropriating German technical archives. In the United States, rumors of the monastery reels surfaced intermittently during the Cold War. A 1952 Air Force Office of Special Investigations, a FOSI memorandum notes. Film reels recovered Austria, classified as visual intelligence, restricted to Attic review. The reference to Attic, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, is significant. Wright-Patterson was the central repository for foreign aircraft technology during this period. Yet no known index of the films exists, suggesting they were stored under a compartmentalized project name. The trail darkens further in 1961, when a fire destroyed part of the monastery. Austrian police declared it accidental, caused by faulty wiring. However, witnesses recalled military vehicles at the site days earlier. Surviving monks claimed important archival records, including post-war correspondence about the American seizure, were destroyed in the blaze. No official US comment was ever made. Some researchers believe the fire was staged to obliterate physical evidence of the seizure. The most tantalizing fragment of evidence emerged in 1998, when a mislabeled canister surfaced in the National Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. The reel contained 46 seconds of silent black and white film showing an outdoor test field. In the background, a mountain ridge consistent with Tyrolean topography can be identified. At the center of the frame sits a metallic structure resembling a circular platform. Uniformed men walk about the structure, their armbands bearing the SS Totenkopf symbol. The footage ends abruptly as one man gestures toward the camera. Archivists confirmed the reel had been misfiled among captured propaganda films. No further footage from the set has ever been found. Skeptics argue the film could depict experimental wind tunnel rigs or tethered V2 component tests, misinterpreted as flying discs. Yet the secrecy surrounding the reels and the deliberate suppression of their chain of custody has fueled decades of speculation. Why, if the films were innocuous, were they never catalogued alongside other captured German technical records? Why were they instead routed through OSS channels and vanished into black archives? Declassified OSS correspondence offers one clue. A 1946 cable from Bern to Washington references visual materials, unacceptable for public dissemination, retain indefinitely. The tone implies not concern over enemy propaganda, but over sensitive technology whose exposure might embarrass Allied governments. Notably, the cable's margin carries a handwritten note. Possible duplication with Morgenstern shipments. The connection to other missing German research projects suggests a broader pattern of concealment. By the 1970s, whispers of the monastery reels entered conspiracy literature, often exaggerated into tales of Nazi supercraft. Yet beneath, the exaggeration lies a paper trail of seizures, missing shipments, and redacted memoranda consistent with genuine suppression. Researchers who filed Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1980s received uniform responses. No records located. This bureaucratic phrase often signals deliberate withholding rather than absence. the fate of the reels remains unresolved. If they were destroyed, no documentation confirms it. If they survive, they are buried in classified archives beyond public reach. What they actually depicted, whether advanced prototypes, staged propaganda, or a hybrid of both, remains hidden. The testimony of Corporal Avery, the warnings of Father Stein, the vanished shipping manifests, and the 46-second reel are all that survive of an episode that official history prefers to forget. The Austrian monastery stands rebuilt today, welcoming tourists with no mention of its wartime chapter. But beneath its quiet stone walls, Allied soldiers once carried away evidence that the Third Reich filmed something too sensitive to survive in the open record. Whatever truths the reels contained were boxed, stamped, and erased from history, leaving only questions in the silence of vanished film stock. The war never truly ended. It shifted into silence. Locked crates, vanished men, and reels of forbidden images were not destroyed, only concealed, waiting like loaded weapons beneath the surface of memory. Each fragment that survives is not revelation but warning. The past is not gone, it is buried alive, and the earth above it is thinner than we think.